We have all heard an older relative argue loudly that trying to go green actually does more harm than good. But arguing back without the hard scientific fact is never going to win you the argument, and it will leave you frustrated and maybe even struck off their will. In this video, I will arm you with the exact science to avoid losing those Sunday dinner debates and prove those boomer eco-myths wrong. We are unpicking the actual data to dismantle their anti-electric car arguments, destroy the blame China excuse, and debunk the wind turbine claims they love to repeat on Facebook. EVs just run on coal. Pull up any video about electric cars, scroll to the comments, and you will find within 30 seconds, electric cars just run on coal, the batteries end up in landfill. You are just moving the pollution from the exhaust pipe to the power station. Sounds like a valid challenge, so let me show you the facts. The UK grid in 2026 ran at roughly 125 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour. The number has been falling every single year as more wind, solar and nuclear come online. At that level, charging an EV produces around 75 to 80% fewer emissions per mile than a petrol car. Not a little less, 3/4 less. There is your first clap back to Uncle Keith. Yes, manufacturing a battery produces more carbon upfront than building a petrol engine. So, where does an EV break even? Around 10,000 to 11,000 miles. Roughly 1 year of average UK driving. After that, every mile is cleaner. Every single mile. The coal argument does hold in countries with genuinely heavy coal grids. In the UK in 2026, the grid simply is not that anymore. And the landfill claim? When an EV battery drops to around 70% capacity, usually after 10 to 12 years, it gets a second life. Repurposed for home energy storage or for holding excess solar and wind power on the grid, so none of it actually goes to waste. The second life battery market is worth over $1.7 billion in 2026. At the end of life, modern recycling recovers 95 to 98% of the lithium, cobalt and nickel, which goes straight back into new batteries. Petrol has no equivalent. You burn it and it's gone. The coal argument is at least based on real concerns. The next one is not even that. It is a pure misdirection. The real problem is China and India. Why should we bother changing anything here? China is building coal plants, India is still developing. Nothing what we do in Britain matters until they sort themselves out. On the surface, the numbers appears to back this up. China is the world's biggest emitter. So, what is actually wrong with the argument? Start with history. The CO2 sitting in the atmosphere right now did not arrive overnight. It is the result of 150 years of industrial activity. The United States alone has produced around 400 billion tons of CO2 since 1751. That is roughly a quarter of everything humans ever emitted. The UK and Europe together account for another 22%. China sits at 13%. India, with 1.4 billion people, has produced around 3% of all the historical emissions. Ever. The atmosphere does not care when those emissions happened. The West filled most of that tank. Now, look at the per person figure. China produces around 7 tons of CO2 per person per year. India produces around 2 tons. The average American produces around 15 tons. And the UK, the official government figure is 4.5 tons, but that excludes imports, aviation and shipping. Add all that in, and the real consumption-based figure for the average person in Britain is closer to 9.5 tons per year. That means the average person in India produces in entire month what someone in the UK produces in under a week, once you count everything we actually consume. Pointing at India as the problem when their average person produces less in a year than we do in 2 months requires ignoring a lot of data. And there is a third issue. A large share of China's industrial emissions exists because Western consumers buy the goods those factories produce. If you track emissions by consumption rather than production, the West's real footprint is significantly higher than the official figures suggest. The next argument sounds like science. It even uses a real fact, but it leaves out the part that makes it fall apart. CO2 is plant food, so more is better. Carbon dioxide is not a pollutant. Plants breathe it. More CO2 means faster growth. A warm planet is a greener planet. And to be fair, the starting point is true. Plants do use CO2 for photosynthesis. So, where does the argument go wrong? Plants need 3 things to grow: CO2, stable temperature, and reliable water. What climate change actually delivers is the opposite of stable. More severe droughts, more flooding, longer heat waves, and unpredictable season that destroys crops before they can be harvested. You can give a plant all the CO2 it wants. If there is no water and the temperature spikes at the wrong moment, it dies. But the part most people have never heard is this. Research from Harvard University and Leiden University found that while excess CO2 can make some crops grow larger, it makes them less nutritious. Not slightly, measurably. Rice, wheat, and barley, the crops that billions of people depend on every day, show significant drops in protein, zinc, and iron when growing under high CO2 conditions. The Leiden study found certain nutrients falling by up to 38%. We could end up producing more food that actually feeds us less. Bigger crops, lower nutrition, more extreme weather. This is not better planet by any measure. That one affects food. The next one affects energy. And the argument against it falls apart the moment you look at the actual numbers. Wind and solar are useless. What happens when the wind stops blowing? What happens at night? We will all be sitting in the dark. And on top of that, wind turbines kill millions of birds. They take more energy to build than they will ever generate. And they are an eyesore. This collection of arguments tends to arrive together, so let me go through each one properly. The wind stops argument was genuine engineering challenge 15 years ago. Today, grid-scale battery storage, pumped hydro, and interconnected national grids that balance supply across nations have addressed it significantly. The UK regularly runs on over 50% renewable energy for extended periods. The technology has caught up. In the US, wind turbines kill around 200,000 to 234,000 birds per year. This is worth taking seriously, and the industry is actively working on reducing it further. But for comparison, domestic cats kill around 2.4 billion birds per year in the US alone. Building windows kill between 365 million and 988 million birds. Wind turbines account for a fraction of a percentage of what cats kill. The concern is not wrong. The proportion is completely off. And the energy payback claim. A modern wind turbine pays back the full carbon cost of manufacturing and installing it within an average of 5 to 6 months. A peer-reviewed study across 4,161 turbine locations in northwestern Europe found an average payback time of 5.3 months. After that, it generates clean electricity for 20 to 25 years. The maths does not require a calculator. That next one is personal. Almost everyone watching this has done it and felt good about it. And that is exactly the problem. I recycle, so I'm doing my part. I separate everything carefully. Blue bin, paper bin, glass, every week without a fail. The intention behind that is genuinely good. What actually happens to that plastic after it leaves your curbside is one of the most important things to understand about a modern waste system. Recycling aluminium works extremely well. It can be recycled almost indefinitely using a fraction of the energy needed to produce new aluminium. Cardboard and paper work too. But plastic, is a completely different story. Since 1950, humans have produced 6.3 trillion kilograms of plastic waste. Around 91% of it has never been recycled. Not because people were careless, because recycling most types of plastic is not economically viable at scale, and the infrastructure for it largely does not exist. The US plastic recycling rate sits at around 5 to 6% and has never exceeded 10%. UK picture for plastic is similarly poor. Putting your yogurt pot in the right bin is still worth doing. But believing that action alone solves the plastic problem is a significant overestimate of what the current system can actually do. And while we are all talking about things that feel greener than they are, let me show you what is probably sitting in your drawers in your kitchen right now. The tote bag. How many tote bags do you have at home? 3? 5? More? Most households have a drawer full of them. The eco bag that was supposed to replace the evil plastic bag. A UK government study found that a standard cotton tote needs to be used at least 173 times before it is greener than a single-use plastic bag on climate impact alone. A Danish environmental protection agency study put the numbers for conventional cotton at 7,100 uses. For organic cotton, the kind with eco-friendly on the label, the figure rises to 20,000 uses. Cotton growing uses 16% of the world's insecticides. The water and land costs are enormous before the bag even left the factory. If your mom has 20 organic tote bags in the drawer, she would need to use the whole collection for 384 years before they break even on the environmental cost of making them. They're not eco bags. They're fast fashion for the supermarket. Made to feel good rather than do good. And while we are correcting things your parents told you at the supermarket, the next one gets argued about at every Sunday dinner in Britain. Local food is always better. Buy local. Your parents have said it for decades. Local beef, good. Avocado from Mexico is bad. Food miles are the problem, except the numbers say something completely different. 1 kilogram of British beef produces around 18 and 26 kilograms of CO2. 1 kilogram of avocado shipped from Mexico is about 2.4 kilograms. That is 10 times less for the avocado that traveled thousands of miles. Transport is usually less than 10% of any food's total carbon footprint. What the food actually is matters far more than how far it traveled. Beef produces methane during digestion, nitrous oxide from the land it grazes, and requires enormous amounts of water and grain to raise. Those numbers are so large they dwarf the shipping cost of almost everything else on your plate. The local steak causes 10 times more carbon damage than the Mexican avocado. Food miles feel like the right thing to measure. The data says otherwise. And by the way, I'm not saying stop eating meat. Last one. And this one applies to anyone with a garden, a granddad or a neighbor who thinks burning rubbish makes it disappear. The backyard burner. Burning rubbish in the garden. It feels like things just go away. Your granddad did it. Half the street probably still does it. But the smoke does not take the problem with it. Low temperature garden fires release dioxins, which are among the most toxic chemicals known to science. A DEFRA report confirmed that smoldering bonfires create exactly the right temperature conditions for dioxin formation. They build up in your body over the time, they do not break down, and you cannot smell or see them. But dioxins are not the only problem. Garden fires also release fine particles directly into the air at ground level, which is exactly where you and your neighbor are breathing. And the scale of the particle pollution is something most people have never considered. Research cited by the European Environment Bureau found that one modern eco-certified wood burner, the kind marketed as the clean domestic option, emits 750 times more fine particles per unit of energy than a modern HGV truck. A lorry a large one. The reason garden and backyard fires are worse still is that they burn at lower temperatures with no control at all, producing even more unburned toxic compounds. The rubbish does not disappear. It just becomes something you and everyone around you breathes in. None of this is about blaming your parents. The people making these arguments are not stupid. Most of them genuinely believe what they are saying, and some of it is based on real facts, just incomplete ones. The problem is that a lot of the conversation around sustainability gets simplified in ways that let us point the finger somewhere else rather than looking at the actual data. The planet does not respond to intentions, it responds to what actually happens. And the gap between what feels like the right answer and what the numbers actually show is where most of the damage quietly lives. If this changes how you see even one of those arguments, that is the whole point. Subscribe if you want more content like this. Evidence-based, no greenwashing, just what the data says. And if you run or manage a business and you want to make sure your sustainability decisions are actually working, the link is in the description. I am Antoni from Drift. Thanks for watching.